Good morning. Glad to be here. Excited. I genuinely just always get excited to talk about Jesus. I just, meditate on who he is and what he's really bringing to the table and what he wants for us. It's exciting, and so I'm excited to focus on some of those things here this morning. And I'm going to start off with a very pertinent question. Maybe a couple. How many scrap bookers do we have in the audience this morning? Anybody do scrap? Okay, there's a few people. I got a couple waves. No one raised their hand really high. I don't know if we're ashamed of that or not. All right, I don't think we are. I love my mom. Actually, she did scrapbooking for a long time. I don't know if she passed that on to me in a way, because I started doing something with my family, and at the end of every year. Somewhere in December, I get all the pictures we took throughout the year. I hone it down because our kids get a hold of our cameras, and there's a lot of terrible, honestly, pictures on our phones. But I get all those together and all the videos we took, and I put those into several collages. And then on New Year's, we will just sit down and watch all that from the last year. And I love it. I love doing it. And I'm always surprised. It takes some work, but I'm always surprised by how much good stuff there was that happened during the year. And remembering it has such a positive impact on me and my family. And more important, I think, is the realization that if I didn't remember it, I would have missed out on that positive impact, that positive feeling. And today we're going to kind of do a little bit of scrapbooking with what we've been going over thus far in our time in 1 John. So we're kind of going to do a little bit of a highlight reel of some of our time. And though I think sometimes for some of us the idea of review troubles us or maybe feels less important than moving forward, but I think it's really just more of a different kind of impact. And I actually began keeping a journal recently. Well, not recently, actually. It's been a decent amount of years, probably around 8 years, actually, where I just started writing down every time I heard something or learned something that really impacted me. I wrote it down. And what I do now, or seek to do on a daily basis, is read one of those excerpts. And the way in which the thoughts I've written down impact me, because I'm writing them down, reviewing them, have become much, much more consistent in my life. I'm much more mindful of them, and there's much more of a practical influence. And that seems pretty obvious, but I think that it's a great reminder of how valuable this type of thing can be. And more importantly, I think review even has a way of measuring something's impact on us. So I think it can be kind of a neat thing to look back at a few things and kind of measure their impact. And so my process for doing that today is going to be to ask some questions, right? And I like asking questions. I like asking questions myself, but I like to ask questions here because I think it calls us more so into what we're talking about, okay? So we're going to ask some questions, and the first one, I don't hear this word much anymore, but the first one's a doozy, okay? Pretty powerful. So a lot of this you should find familiar from what Jason's been talking about. But here's the first question I want us to ponder today, and I'm probably going to repeat each one of the questions, but here it is. Now let's also remember, before I ask it, let's look inward as opposed to outward. We're not here to gauge how everybody else is doing this morning. We're here to let God's word impact us and see how he wants it to. First question, is it impossible to know Jesus and not be inspired to accomplish his goals? It's a pretty powerful question. It's a pretty bold statement in a question. But is it really impossible to know Jesus and not be inspired to accomplish his goals? I actually love that. That was Jason's question, really, by the way, not mine, but I love that question. Makes me think. 1 John 2, verse 4 says, "The one who says, 'I have come to know him,' and does not keep his commandments is a liar, and the truth is not in him. Wow, these writers can be so bold sometimes. It's a very bold statement. I'll repeat it again. The one who says, I have come to know him, and does not keep his commandments is a liar, and the truth is not actually in him. Now, I want to kind of do a little bit of twist on the way we perceive this passage here this morning, because for a long, long time, and I'm not telling you there's only one way to view this passage or think about this passage, but for a long time, I kind of just viewed this passage as effort-based. In other words, I read the passage and I'm now looking out around me at everybody else. And it's like kind of a challenge to everybody. Are you living, really what I'm trying to say is, are you living like me in relation to God and church and the Bible? And I'm going to use how you're living as I view you to decide whether you actually know him, because you're going to look pretty similar to me, I'm assuming, if you actually know God. But I kind of want to step a little bit out of that and have a little bit different idea, and I'm going to do that in a little bit of a weird way first, because we're going to have a 2-question quiz this morning. I like quizzes if they teach me something. But has anybody ever looked up any of the on this day information? Like, you can go online. Sometimes they have books too, and it's like who was born, who died, what incredible things happened on this day in history. Well, that's what our quiz is going to be based on, because in 1851 today, Moby Dick was published, all right, as a novel, okay? So, long time ago. I don't know if you've read it. If you haven't, you're going to be at a disadvantage, but that's what our quiz is based on, but it's going to kind of be based on what's in the book. Here's where our questions come from. So, and I want you to choose. I'm not going to come out there and grab your arm and force it in the air, but I do want you to participate. Here, this is going to be interactive. So here's the first question. If you were going to buy Captain Ahab a book, what would a great subject matter be? All right? 1, a self-help book. 2, a Bible. 3, a book on native peoples. Or 4, a book on military history. Okay? So, here we go. If you think he would want a book on self-help, raise your hand. All right, we got one. So maybe you're thinking he needs help. He had some issues. He probably should have talked to somebody. All right, who thinks it was a Bible? All right, I mean, I figured that would be a safe answer here, right? Who thinks it would have been on native peoples and the history of that? No one. All right, what about military history? Anyone? A few. Okay, well, this shouldn't make me feel like I crafted this well, but it kind of does. It was the one no one raised their hand on. All right, it was native people. All right, the history of native people in the area. And again, first of all, it's a fictional story, and I'm just basing it on a fictional story, my question. But that's the correct answer, because his ship was named after a specific tribe of native people. So it would be a good guess that he would be interested in that subject, correct? Yeah, okay. So again, that's kind of one of those things we could talk about, and you could get mad at me for choosing that one. But anyway, I am making these things up. So, all right, except for the fact that that's what the ship was called in the story. So second question, what might you best use to motivate Ahab? 1, money. 2, violence. 3, kind words. Or 4, the promise of his own kingdom. All right, so here we go. Raise your hands. Who thinks money would best motivate him? Raise your hand. All right, I think we just got one. Who thinks it would be violence would best motivate him? No one wants to say it. All right, yeah, okay. And this is 1851, remember? Kind words. All right, got kind words. And then last, the promise of his own kingdom. All right, that's where the majority is. Well, the correct answer is money. All right, so good job. All right, in the book, he actually uses money at a point in the story to motivate others by nailing some of it to the mast to remind them of the reward there would be for what they're doing. So again, I'm kind of extrapolating there. But the point of this exercise is to point out, if you're really a fan of something, I mean really, it's sometimes quite easy to identify who is not. You know what I'm saying? Like if you really, really know something and you hear somebody else talking about it and they're really just kind of a surface level, like you can usually tell there's certain things one would know. And those are like, those would be super duper Moby Dick fans. Like that's deep level Moby Dick fan. But I think it's kind of an interesting thing to think about. And this passage is in a way kind of communicating the same idea. Like of whether you really, really know him or not, or just think you know him. And I kind of talked about stepping outside and looking at the passage from a little bit different perspective, and I'm kind of getting into that now. But one way of looking at this passage is, and here's the bold claim, if you really knew Jesus, if you really understood where he's coming from, the genius, the inclusivity, the better way of what he is intending, it is so evident and so next level that you'll have no desire to promote anything outside of that. That's still a very bold statement, but it's a little bit different way of thinking about it. I'm going to say that again. If you really knew Jesus, if you really understood where he is coming from, the genius, the inclusivity, the better way of what he is intending, it is so evident and so next level that you'll have no desire to promote anything outside of that. Now, I want to say one quick caveat here of what I don't mean. I'm not saying to those especially who have not really come to any conclusions about Jesus or attempted to get to know who he is, I'm not saying that you can look at the church and just assume, okay, well, I guess everything they're doing is correct and right and the best way. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying the heart of Jesus, what is really at his heart. So before we get too offended by that statement or too delighted by that statement, let me offer a few thoughts. First of all, if the idea of this passage seems offensive, consider this. Although I believe the word commandment has been tainted by humans who try to manipulate through guilt, I believe a way of explaining Christ's idea of a commandment could be this. If you believe what I'm trying to create is actually what is best, here is how you can take part in bringing that about. Because we all kind of have something that comes into our mind when we hear the commandment. We just automatically think, someone's giving it this way. And some of us are like, well, I'm on this team, so I love that. And some of us are like, well, I'm not on Team Jesus or whatever, so I don't really like that, because we all can think of people who bully and manipulate people into following them and what they want. And there's consequences if you don't. But thinking of it along those lines, when Christ is giving a commandment, I'm not saying that he doesn't have the authority to do that, but I'm just saying, thinking of it in that sense, if you believe what I'm trying to create is actually what is best, here's how you can take part and bring that about, because I don't actually think God forces anybody to do anything. I think he gives them the choice. I think that's one of the things, that's why we have a free will. It's in our very nature. Because of the way this idea of commandments has been abused, some have even sought to remove rules from their or their loved ones' lives because of how some people have used commandments for personal gain, manipulation, or their own status, as opposed to the good of all. But one of the things we don't realize, one of the things I believe about Jesus, and one of the things I feel like I see consistently about him, is even when he's giving a commandment, a way to do things, there's always a way in which it's for the good of all. And if we're not seeing that, or where that comes into play, maybe we should look a little bit deeper. Even though the idea of commandments has been abused, I would encourage anyone who struggles with that idea to not let someone's misrepresentation of Jesus deter you from exploring the beauty beyond their possible confusion. Right? Because people, several hundred years ago marched on entire towns and killed everybody in Jesus' name, and everybody's got opinions about that. Some people are like, sweet. Some people who are Christians are like, I don't know how to deal with the fact that kind of stuff happened. It's like, well, people misrepresent Jesus too, remember that. Even though the idea of commandments has been abused, I could have long conversations with anyone here and would be willing to about the fact that I have my own things that I believe have been misrepresented to me, and therefore they've confused me or sometimes even disgusted me. But I would also be excited to share a lot of the beauty I feel like I've been able to discover that just sometimes takes stepping outside the general consensus to find it. So that's one thing I would put out there for those who are offended by that idea. For those of us who may get a little too excited about the idea of commandments, and we love the idea of rubbing in everybody else's face the commandments, the consequences, the rules that maybe set us apart as God's elite, I think there's a good chance we're not understanding some of the aspects of God's love. And I'm not saying that as a judgmental statement. I emphasize this because I believe for a large part of my life this was my approach to God and Jesus in the Bible. It was this idea of I kind of enjoyed rubbing those things in because I was on team right, and it was fun to rub in how right I was or something along those lines. But I think that that's something for us to really consider. You know, I don't know that that's really at the heart of what's going on here, if we're getting too excited about that aspect. But going back to the general idea of the question, where we're asking, is it impossible to know Jesus and not be inspired to accomplish his goals? Here's some questions to ask ourselves in light of considering whether I really know Jesus. First question, what does it say about me if I don't care much about Christ's suggestions for my life? That I'm not really that concerned about taking part in them. I go to church, I know who he is, I believe I know the truth, but I'm not really concerned about that trickling down into the rest of my life. In light of considering whether I really know Jesus, how do I know if I'm responding to a misrepresentation of Christ's commandments? Honestly, I'd say, and this is kind of another one of those questions, it's more so to get us to think than trying to tell you to only think this way. But I'd say if you really believe a commandment of Christ's is wrong, you haven't seen the heart of it. If you really believe it's wrong, you haven't seen the heart of it. And let me give an example of that because, again, I think a lot of people think of, so all this stuff the church promotes? No, that's not what I'm saying. Let's use murder as an example, okay? If I say, you shall not murder other people, okay? Now, someone could say to me, I think first we'd all, for the most part, agree, yeah, murder, no, don't murder people, no. All right, we're all on team don't murder. Okay, that's great. Good, okay? But someone could say, and I don't think we'd be very surprised in the world we live in, someone could say, well, that offends me because I actually like it, and I think it's okay for me, so I actually think what you're saying about murder is wrong. Well, if we did that little surface dance, we could go back and forth all day, even though to many of us it may seem silly. But if you really go deep to the heart of why murder is so disgusting, it's really based on the principle that each individual human life is so precious and so valuable that is pretty much the worst thing that you can do to a human being. You could argue all day long about what somebody wants to do and what offends them. At the end of the day, everybody either believes they should be valued or wants to be valued, even if they're not. And who is going to get all up in arms seriously about that truth that God is trying to promote? I'm just saying it helps to look a little deeper. If you really believe a commandment of Christ is wrong, perhaps you haven't seen the heart of it. And I'm not saying that based on the feeling that way about everything across the board, but by being witness to that enough times. There's been multiple issues I've just kind of sat in and studied and watched Christ and read. And I believe, this is kind of just a side thing, I believe when he says, if you seek, you'll find. I think he's faithful to that if you really are serious about pursuing those things. So in light of considering whether you really know Jesus, How do you know if you're really promoting and or taking part in the beauty at the heart of his commandments? Do you find yourself emphasizing guilt, consequence, and rules, or the beautiful thing at the heart of it? How do you know if you're really promoting the beauty at the heart? If there's still an answer to, but why that rule or why that consequence? Maybe you're not at the heart of it yet. How do you know if you're really promoting the beauty at the heart? Are you seeking to love others regardless of whether or not they join your team in the end? How do you know if you're really promoting the beauty at the heart? Are you angered by the fact that someone doesn't want to live by your rules? Because that's really, I don't believe, what's at the heart of that whole issue. Perhaps this whole thing is really just an issue of letting him speak for himself. And maybe our job is a little less to tell people what we think he's trying to tell them as introducing them to him so they can learn from the one who really knows the heart of what he's trying to do. The best thing I ever did in my life, I honestly believe, I've grown up in the church. I would have considered myself for a long time to have been very religious. The best decision I ever made was to read the Gospels like I had never heard anything else before, and just watch Jesus and his heart. And it really began to take me deeper, and my obsession with my own perspective and the way I would portray things and what he was doing, who he is, that I had received from others and all those things. I would just, that's something I would encourage anyone and everyone to do, but perhaps it's an issue of letting him speak for himself, all right? So this morning I just want to ask, we're kind of, it may not seem like it, but we're kind of jumping into a lot of the different aspects of what Jason has been talking about in 1 John as we went through that, and we're going to ask one more question and do a little bit more of that, and then we'll be done today. But the other main question that I want to ask that kind of includes a lot of what we talked about is this. So this is another moment for us to think about ourselves and our perspective and how we're approaching the world. Are the following concepts that we're about to talk about signs we don't actually get or truly desire to take part in Jesus' goals or what is at the heart of his commandments? So we're kind of expounding on that idea. But are the following concepts possible signs we don't actually get or truly desire to take part in Jesus' goals or what is at the heart of his commandments? So we're going to start by looking at 1 John 2, verse 9. Convicting little number here. The one who says he is in the light and yet hates his brother is in the darkness until now. Let's just kind of sum that one up. You say you're in the light and you hate your brother, you're not. All right? If you think you're promoting what's right and yet you hate your brother, you probably shouldn't be promoting this thing because you don't get it. I remember the Forever Will Be Burned. Everybody remembers like their honeymoon and all those things, but there's something about our right after we got married, it's forever burned into my memory. I spoke at a camp the week after our honeymoon, and we were, it was a very, very rustic setting. We were sleeping in a tent, and I had heard earlier that day that the high school kids were making plans to do some pranking and stuff in the night, and I'm a paranoid person by nature, and so I was not sleeping at all. I was as alert as could possibly be, just waiting for some kind of attack. I was ready to intercept and everything. It was going to be great. They weren't going to see it coming. Well, in the middle of me sitting there waiting, and I could hear people out there, all of a sudden, this person that I knew, but, didn't really know, apparently as well as I thought I did, sits up all of a sudden, very quickly. This is Hannah. She's right over here. Twists, brings her hand down as hard as she possibly can, slaps me square in the chest, open-handed. I was terrified. All right, what is happening? Why is this person attacking me? And I'm to be honest, I'm immediately angry because it hurt. I've been attacked. What is going on? And she begins to elaborate on her reasoning. And she goes, this huge spider came down from the ceiling of the tent and landed on your chest, and I killed it. And I was like, that did not happen. I had been laying there awake the whole time. There was no huge spider. There was nothing. Turns out Hannah reacts in real life to some of her dreams. And I was the sad outcome of that. Anyway, I said, no, it didn't. I've just been laying here awake. And she just stared at me for about 2 seconds and then fell over asleep. I think she was asleep the whole time, but it was a very interesting experience. But it was the most ridiculous excuse ever for hitting me because of the perspective that I had. All right? She was in no position to comment on the way that things really were. All right? She was totally out of it. And honestly, there are those who bring this same level of confidence to claiming Jesus, who I believe can be just as confused. And they do some very aggressive things in light of it sometimes. Let's look at some examples, some more realistic examples, how this might play out. And again, don't think about the other side or the other people. Let's just think about us. Okay, here's some examples how this can play out in the church, in our own personal lives. If someone's political views make us feel like we can devalue them, we've stepped outside of the way of Jesus. Now, I'm not talking about Jesus says, agree with everyone you talk to, or let everybody just walk around and do or change or whatever. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying if someone's viewpoints make us feel like we can devalue them in our minds, we've stepped outside of the way of Jesus. If the fact that we've been hurt by someone else makes us feel like we can ignore them instead of confronting them in love and forgiving them, we're no longer acting in the light. If someone's different perspectives, beliefs, or convictions make us feel like they no longer belong here, or we can gossip about them, or we don't need to look for ways to serve them anymore, we're no longer imitating Christ. And that is hard for me to hear, because we get so wrapped up sometimes in our own perspective that we think it excuses a whole host of behaviors. And yet we have one of the most convicting ideas of love and what it's like to follow the way of Jesus. The one who says he is in the light and yet hates his brother. In other words, the one who feels they can view or treat someone in a way that Christ does not approve of simply because of option A, B, C, D, E, F, G. They're not in the light. They're not of the way of Jesus. Are we claiming someone we're really just kind of confused about? If we really feel like he's given us the go-ahead to treat people that way. I don't know. I think this gives us a pretty good idea. Let's look at another passage that kind of brings up this same issue of gauging, am I actually getting it or truly desiring to take part in his goals? What's at the heart of his commandments? 1 John 2:16 says, "For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the boastful pride of life is not from the Father, but is from the world." For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the boastful pride of life is not from the Father, but is from the world. In other words, if this is your obsession, which really kind of, you could boil it down to a very self-focused advancement of your existence, that idea is not from the Father. How many of you are, I know everybody in here now is going to be aware of social media at this point. How many people are aware of TikTok, the app, the social media app? How many people, you know it's out there? For those of you who don't know what it is, and maybe others wouldn't define it this way, but it's an app where you can anyone can record very homemade videos and immediately goes out there, and everybody's got a very slim chance of it going viral and becoming popular. And so it's very interesting, and I actually started using the app when it was kind of first came out, and I was on there, and it was a very different place than it is now. But one of the things that, and now I know this is totally out of the norm because no one on social media is ever fake, right? That never happens, okay? But when the app was new, there was a lot less of that. But as it began to, gain traction and more people got on there, I began to notice more and more fake videos popping up. Like people were like faking scenarios and life experiences and different things like that. And one of the ones that particularly annoyed me was this one going around where someone would be like hiding with their camera and someone else would be like in the house singing beautifully. And they would secretly sneak up on them and film them, and they just had no idea they were sending their beautiful voice out to the world. And then the person would turn around and be like, oh my goodness, I had no idea you were there. Well, maybe I'll be famous now. And it was just, and I just saw it, and then I began to realize people were using the same soundtrack. Like, how does everyone on TikTok have the same voice? And I was just, wow, this is ridiculous. So if you don't know this about me, a little quick bio pass thing here. I've been involved in media production for a long time and doing different things along those notes. A lot of it has been kind of more comedy-based, and I love parody. So anyway, I decided to make a video where I was, so I did dabble in a little bit of TikTok. I haven't done a whole lot, but so I was singing somewhere in the house, and anyway, my wife filmed, and so she, acting like I didn't know she was there filming me, and then I turned around and made this super over the top. Oh my goodness, I cannot believe you were there. It was very obvious that I knew. Anyway, ironically, that video, it's the only time this has ever happened to me, but that video ended up going viral. I think that everyone was kind of just so refreshed to see somebody kind of bring some truth, a spotlight to the lie that was what was called a trend. And anyway, it was just kind of a funny concept. But now at this point, pretty much any video that you see on there was either copied from someone else or it's totally fake. None of it's real. And it's kind of ruined it, in my opinion, because what's the point of us going on there and faking those things? But you've probably all seen stuff like this on your own social media stuff you've been on. One of my favorites is when people they'll post a romantic thing they've done for someone else. Now, don't get me wrong, I actually think there is like this thing, like I'm in love and I want the world to know it. And that actually can make some people feel good when we tell everyone we love them and we care for them. So I'm not judging the hearts of people on social media. I mean, we are, but, but the point is there's people out there, though, making money by coming up with fake scenarios like that. And so the good question I think some people think, oh, I should do that too, but I think a good question as we post stuff on social media should be, who am I doing this for? I mean, in that instance, it might flatter the person, but it also might make the person be like, so did you post that for me? Or did you post that to get attention for you? I'm not actually calling what people's hearts are, but I think those are things to good about. And I'm mostly giving that illustration to shine some light on this passage. Because much more importantly, I think this question can be very revealing when it comes to whether we're living a life that is partaking in His way. When we do something, when we put something out there, when we make a decision to act in the world or make something part of our lives, who are we really doing it for? Who are we really doing it for? If the heart of why we do what we do is the same as what's at the heart of Jesus' commandments, what we do will truly be for the advancement of all equally. We're not making decisions. If somebody asks me, does Christ make decisions? Does He say, I think you should do this because He's ever thinking? Because there's this one dude I really care about more than anybody else. And I'm hoping just things work out better for him. No, He's not. I don't believe so. I don't believe that's what I get from Scripture. If the heart of why we do what we do is really for our own advancement, we're on a different path, the path that is from the world, as it defines it. Now, to avoid the idea that everyone who is a Christian is better than anyone who is not, I know this whole from the world thing can be a little distracting, but I think the whole point of that is just the fact that the natural inclination of us all is to think of ourselves. Not that, hey, if you go to a church and you've slapped the title Christian on yourself, now all your motivations are pure. That's not the point. The point is we have to all choose instead to be selfless, while selfishness comes naturally for all of us. It's the natural state. Also, in case anybody thinks I'm trying to comment on it, I'm not promoting any type of, when we're talking about the advancement of all, I'm not commenting on any specific system of government or anything like that either, because I honestly think you can twist any of them to make it about your own self-advancement. Doesn't matter what your formula is. It can become about you. It's what's at the heart. There's nothing wrong with using something like time for ourselves, but in honor of Jesus' way, how intentional are we that we reserve some of that time for our family as well as our community? Same with money. Same with possessions, our capacity for love. In honor of the heart of Jesus, do we see the extra we receive simply as God's personal blessing that we're just so very blessed to have, or something to be dispersed where there is need as well? Do we define sacrifice as simply offering what is extra or offering what will actually cost us? I believe all these things are the heart of Jesus. And it's easy to say, does somebody go to church the way I go to church? What's harder is the heart of God actually transforming my life, and do I get it enough for it to even do that? Am I putting in that work, that consideration? So in conclusion, we've kind of wrapped up, a lot of the ideas that Jason just kind of sent me a bunch of highlights from what he'd been sharing as we're seeking to represent some of those, not all of those. My hope here at the end is not that you will feel guilty, because here's a bunch of more things for your list of ways to obey God or you stink. Okay? That's not the point. That is not the point of this. It's simply to get us to consider, who is Jesus? Who is he, really? What is really at the heart of his commandments? What's he really getting at? If I'm going to claim him, am I really claiming what he's actually promoting? Am I really promoting something undeniably great for all, or is there maybe a secret promotion of myself behind there, like being right or appearing holier? Am I really frustrated with his heart, or am I frustrated with the misrepresentation of it? How might asking some of these questions aid in exploring all of this? It's a pretty firm belief of mine, that unless one intentionally reserves an additional moment to ponder something, it won't make much of an impact. Something in addition to the initial moment that we interacted with the thought. But if what we've looked at today is challenging something in you, and I always like to say, don't let something making you feel uncomfortable automatically make you think something bad has been said. Maybe it's supposed to draw something out of you. I don't think people really change much without a little bit of discomfort in their lives. But if this is challenging something in you, I would invite you again, like I talked about last week at the end of the service, I'd like to invite you into pursuing this together as a church, which takes more than just coming here and listening to things about it. It takes some kind of tangible effort on our own personally, even if that turns into a corporate approach. It's not just receiving. Here's some examples of what this might look like. I used to think the ways that work best for me probably will work best for everybody. I don't believe that anymore. I think we're all wired different. I think we all interact with information and different things in different ways. But here are some just examples of ways to kind of initiate an additional moment with this idea. One would be have a conversation about it with someone else. If it has to be a conversation of, I need to list all the ways I disagree with what he said, that's better than nothing. Don't turn it into gossip, please, because that just hurts all kinds of people, whether you think they found out about it or not. But have a conversation about it with somebody else. Another way would be to bring it up at another church function. What do you guys think about that? And hopefully all these things will be done in love. But another one is take a walk or sit alone, meditate, and pray on it. If that's kind of more how you're wired, if that's what helps you, or maybe seek out additional teaching on it. I'm only representing one perspective. This was not me up here saying, I hope you like perfect truth, because I just brought it, all right? That's not what I believe. I think God can use me in spite of my mistakes and limited perspective sometimes. And I'm going to do something a little bit different here at the end. It's not going to be super weird, but for some, just anything different feels super weird. I just want to take a moment of silence, however that works best for you, to shut everything out. Maybe close your eyes, look at the floor, maybe stare ahead. I don't care. Or don't participate. That's also fine too. This is not a commandment. Or it is, depending on how you look at the word commandment. That was just off the top of my head there, so that was fun. But before we end, just want to take 1 minute, literally just 1 minute, to just ponder not so much the whole concept of what we talked about, because a minute will be pretty much useless, but just, should I interact with this more, and how am I going to do that? Just a minute of silence to figure that out, if that's how you're feeling led, if that's how you're feeling challenged. And then I will just say a minute after that, whoever will be playing closing piano music this morning, after a minute's passed, just feel free to start playing, and then we'll know the minute's up, or something like a minute. And again, it might feel a little weird, a little different, but I think a better question to ask is, what is at the heart of what I'm asking us to do here in this next minute? Not so much, how different is this than what I'm used to? Let's just take a minute of silence and ponder.